Okay, well, hello, and thank you for joining us. You are watching a podcast series that we're calling America Under Fire, The Old Guy Speaks. This is segment 13, and it's entitled Deep State. Let me briefly give a little perspective on what is meant by the deep state. We have been privileged to have the all-time greatest form of government in human history, thanks to the wisdom and the foresight of our founding fathers. Unlike today's school graduates, they knew their history and what had and hadn't worked before. Our three-branch government structure, our executive, legislative, and judicial branches, have built in checks and balances so that power can theoretically not be monopolized by any one branch. But the takeover of education by Marxist elements has largely removed the moral base and the public knowledge required to maintain freedom. Ben Franklin and many others have repeatedly told us that manufactured ignorance of our founding principles will be our undoing, and we're seeing that now. That ignorance now impacts public policy in all areas of endeavor, and the forces pushing for such ignorance certainly include external forces like lobbyists and other third-party interests that pressure our elected officials. But I want to focus now on the internal, the unelected workers of the executive branch who supposedly carry out the laws passed by our elected officials. The legislative branch has its own deep state, now writing laws that can be thousands of pages long with little bombs hidden here and there, so that very few people, if any, and that includes our senators and representatives, can even know what's in the proposed legislation. That's the legal framework that must be followed as the people's will. And it gets even more complicated after a law is passed. The baton then passes to the executive branch, where the laws are carried out, executed in the executive branch. The executive branch then writes more detailed regulations specifying how compliance with the law is to be carried out, generally nationwide. That's the regulatory framework, and it is by definition more complex and involved than even the legal framework of the law. For example, I've read that the Obamacare regulations alone are 8 times longer than the Bible. And here's the problem. The education system is now giving us young Marxists with no moral compass and no understanding of or concern for the public interest. And worse yet, a sense of superiority over who must comply with the law and regulation in real life. So the intent of Congress, even good intentions, can get skewed toward evil ends, and processes so complex and so misdirected that they weaken America instead of strengthening her. And the regulatory deep state is nearly as vulnerable to lobbying pressures as is the Congress. So the lobbyists kind of get 2 bites at the apple, meaning double the opportunity to skew things in their favor. Think COVID vaccines as an example. The deep state is all of those bureaucrats in the legislative and the executive branches who work in isolation from and in ignorance of the real world, and thus oftentimes work against the real world. Draining the swamp means removing executive and legislative branch workers who have been trained or conditioned to work against the public interest rather than for America. Squib. From Brownstone Institute founder Jeffrey Tucker. The administrative state is so deeply embedded that cabinet officers are just figureheads. And that's highly believable. Thank you for your time. That completes these comments. You'll come back soon. We'll go to segment 14, which will be entitled Words and Narratives. Thank you.